When you think about horror on the Nintendo 64, a few games may come to mind. Perhaps it's the terrifying moon in Majora's Mask. Maybe it's the claustrophobic basement in Super Mario 64, or that shark that used to stalk you in Banjo-Kazooie. The point is, most of the time, people remember scary moments, not actual horror games. Which makes sense. The N64 was a console built primarily for kids. It was loud, colorful, and even obnoxious at times. A machine full of Italian plumbers and time-traveling elves. And yet, somewhere in that swirl of bright plastic and Saturday morning joy, something darker stirred. A shadow beneath the gray paint, a current running under the surface, like a decrepit basement rotting below the floorboards of a child's playroom. Some games feel like they shouldn't exist on this platform, and yet, they do. I'm not talking about in a Crow 64 way, mind you. I mean actual games that were made for the console. These games weren't always good. Some were clunky, others cursed, and a few were just weird. But the developers were trying. You could feel it. The ambition, the uncertainty, the creativity that comes from not knowing the rules just yet. All of them tell a story about a time when horror was changing, when the genre was learning to shamble around at 3D, and sometimes tripping over its own limbs in the process. And that's what I love about them. So tonight, we're gonna dust off a few of these old cartridges, maybe blow in them once or twice for good measure. I said in them. Get your mind out of the gutter. So grab your favorite Halloween candy, turn the lights low, and settle in, because we're about to enter the forgotten world of Nintendo 64 horror games.
Holiday season, it's the new Nintendo 64. So what's the big deal, and why is Toys R Us already sold out? We have the answers.
Back in the golden age of late 90s gaming, I was but a wee lad. Every weekend my dad would take me down to the local video store to rent a game. He was a hard-working construction guy. Age ratings on boxes never even crossed his mind. Hell, he let me rent Conker's Bad Fur Day 3 weeks straight. Boy, you sure like that squirrel game.
Conker, honey, fancy going for a bounce?
A bounce? Okay. Now this is what I call a platform game.
Yeah, Dad, it's awesome. One fine October weekend, I was feeling the Halloween spirit. I didn't want to rent another kid game like Banjo-Kazooie. I wanted something darker. Something that pushed me beyond the safety of Pokemon and Mucha Lucha. Now, I wasn't a complete stranger to the concept. I had beaten Ocarina of Time, and Lord knows that game has its fair share of horror. I also played Resident Evil with my best friend on PlayStation. But everyone knows, playing a scary game with your buddy eliminates like 90% of the tension.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
No, this would be a solo quest. A journey into the abyss, armed with nothing more than courage and some dunkaroos. But the question was, which game would it be? My first pick was Turok, but the dinosaur on the cover had freaked me out, and I didn't want to see what else the game had in store for me. So, after scouring the shelves a bit more, I saw this badass dude holding a skull with a mask popping out of his chest. In retrospect, he looks a lot like Vin Diesel's character, Reddick, from Pitch Black. I looked into this for like 10 minutes and I couldn't find any connection. The box art looked just grim enough to give me a fright, but not so much that I would sleep with the lights on. Well, let me tell you, the cover lied. When young me handed that box to my dad, he looked at it and said, "Huh, that looks cool." Yeah, Dad, it was cool. So cool that it gave me nightmares for a week. We both learned a valuable lesson that day. He'd start paying a bit more attention to what I was renting, and I'd stop trying to be so brave. Well, I'm a grown-up now, big tough guy. There's nothing I can't handle. Surely those memories were just childhood exaggeration. There's no way an N64 game could really be that dark, right? Well, there's only one way to find out. We need to cross on over to the Deadside. Unlike some of the other games in this video, Shadowman wasn't an N64 exclusive. Far from it actually, and for good reason. It was a technical showcase back in its day. Its lead platform, the PC, was able to handle the game's complex graphical fidelity and performance in ways its console counterparts could only dream of. A far second might be the Dreamcast version, but there weren't a lot of people playing that. Knowing this, it should come as no surprise that the Nintendo port had to make some compromises. Led by Simon Phipps, the team at Acclaim Studios' Deadside was trying to build something that didn't really fit on the 64, both literally and figuratively. This was a dark, brooding game filled with adult themes and violence that doesn't really fit on those store shelves between Pokemon Snap and Mario Golf. Yet, the real challenge existed in the system's technical limitations. The PlayStation version of the game was 650 megabytes. I know that's tiny by today's standards, but this was the size of one whole disc back in the day. Meanwhile, the N64 cartridge, as the name suggests, maxed out at a whopping 64 megabytes. That's smaller than a minor update patch on a modern indie game. This meant that every texture, every cutscene, every guttural sound from Deadside had to be compressed and shoved into this tiny plastic coffin. Despite its size, the 64's cartridge offered one small advantage over the PlayStation: near instant loading. Cartridges allowed for much faster data transfer speeds than CD-ROMs, since they didn't rely on a laser moving across a physical disc. It was just one unbroken descent from Louisiana to the land of the dead. With the potential of Nintendo's market share far outweighing the risks, Acclaim Deadside got to work, and their approach was meticulous. Lead designer Simon Phipps once compared their level design process to that of architectural planning. They didn't just throw geometry at the wall, they built worlds on paper first. Every corridor and chamber was mapped out to make sure it wouldn't collapse under the weight of its own ambition. And it worked. Against all odds, the N64 version held its frame rate better than that of PlayStation's, even while juggling sprawling, interconnected environments. On top of this, the expansion pack unlocked a higher resolution mode that made Deadside's ruins look a little sharper, visually speaking. Now, don't take all of this as me dunking on the PlayStation. In fact, it's quite the opposite. PlayStation was seen as the best way to play almost any third-party software during this time. So whenever the 64 gets a small win like this, it's worth highlighting. And so, after many months of hard work, Acclaim Deadside released Shadowman 64 in August of 1999. The game received largely positive reviews, with praise for its dark and compelling atmosphere, sprawling level design, and robust sound and voice acting. Many critics considered it a standout title on the console and the superior version, the PC notwithstanding. This was a big win for Nintendo. By '99, the platform was already labeled as the safe console. Meanwhile, all the cool kids were playing Metal Gear Solid and GTA over on the PlayStation. Sure, we had GoldenEye, but James Bond wasn't ripping darts and snapping people's necks. This was one of the few mature titles Nintendo could point to and say, "See, we're cool too." And this game was certainly that.
The 9th of November, 1888. By my deeds am I known, and I am known.
When the game starts, we're greeted to the sounds of Moonlight Sonata, and treated to a monologue by none other than Jack the Ripper, the notorious serial killer of 19th century London. One thing that's evident from the very beginning, this game oozes with style. It's pure cinema. Half the time you feel like you're playing through a movie, and I mean that in the best way possible. You could skip through the cutscenes and dialogue, but you won't want to, because they're that damn good. The voice acting and performances in this game are excellent, and even more mind-blowing when you remember what system this is on. We're going to circle back to this later, but I just wanted to mention it right up front. Same goes for the cinematography. These cutscenes are filmed with purpose. The camera isn't just thrown wherever. The director was trying to evoke a certain feeling or show off something cool. Again, very movie-like. Every aspect of this game maintains the same standard and passion, and it makes for one hell of an immersive experience. Here, I'll let you watch the opening cutscene, and you can experience it for yourself. This does run a few minutes long, so if you want to skip ahead, just jump to the next chapter. For everyone else, get ready for some late 90s awesomeness.
A place of asylum for all of the unique and misunderstood individuals that will follow you as the time of Armageddon approaches. And at the heart of Asylum, we shall construct a great dark engine powered by souls of equal hue, and we shall harness their power to create an immortal army to punish and cleanse this pathetic world.
And where might I build this cathedral of yours?
Across the veil, in the darkness, amongst the restless spirits of those who have passed beyond, in the place known as Deadside.
Then, if I am to join you, I must die.
It is prophecy. We cannot fail, for we are many.
For we are many.
Amen to that.
There's a darkness coming.
What's the problem, Magneta?
I had a dream, Shadowman. A real bad dream. A Deadside dream. The five are here. The herald of the apocalypse. Deacon's fire confirms everything I feared. The end's coming, Shadowman. An ancient prophecy tells of the return of a great evil to Deadside. A terrible force gathering dark souls to its darker heart and using their power to cross over into this world and bring about apocalypse.
I must stop this evil from bringing about the end of all things.
Only you can do it, Shadowman. You are the walker between the worlds. I can't go Deadside, and Jaunty's next to useless in both worlds. You are the only one who can do anything about this.
As it ever was.
But you ain't never confronted anything like this evil. It's so pure, not even the ancient protectors of the Dark Souls could destroy it. They could only banish it from Deadside. They knew it'd come back one day, hence the prophecy telling of its return. The power of the ancients is all but gone now, and the Dark Souls that evil desires lie unprotected. What you gotta do, Shadowman, is to go Deadside and recover the Dark Souls. Take them into your own protection before evil gathers them to its terrible heart.
Okay, so let me get this straight. If I don't recover these Dark Souls, then the world's gonna end. Am I right?
You got it.
Shit.
Look, I gotta go. I've got a lot to do. Take Deacon's file and meet me at dawn at the church on the hill. I've kept your stuff safe for you.
From here, the stage is set. Legion's primary goal is to trigger the apocalypse and take control of the human world, otherwise known as Liveside. As the ruler of Deadside, he seeks to expand his dark dominion by breaking the barrier between these two worlds. To achieve this, he recruited a group of 5 infamous serial killers, providing them each with demonic power. These killers must help him gather immortal artifacts known as Dark Souls. That's right, this game is about Dark Souls, but not the one you're thinking of. The protagonist, Michael LaRaw, must race against Legion and his followers to find and collect these Dark Souls before they could be used for their sinister purpose. Now right up front, I have to shout out Michael LaRaw's voice actor, Red Pepper. Red is a legend in the voice acting community. He's voiced countless movie trailers in the UK for films like Space Jam and Armageddon. His deep, booming voice often draws comparisons to fellow voice acting legend Don LaFontaine. Pepper's performance in Shadowman is every bit as dramatic and immersive as it's ever been. He's chewing up the scenes here with the finesse of an epic craftsman, and it sounds like they might have even lightened his voice a bit for the character, though that could just be a result of the compression. Anyways, back to Mike LaRaw. There's a significant amount of lore about his character and the Shadowman, which is pulled from the Valiant Comics series of the same name. I won't be doing that deep of a dive here, but there's plenty of great videos out there that certainly do. I'd recommend this awesome one from Boulder Punch, as he interweaves the events between both the comics and game. It's a great watch. The important thing to know about Mike is his journey is one of personal tragedy and deep-seated guilt. Once a college student, his life spiraled out of control when he stole money from a gangster. His choices led to a brutal ambush that killed his family and a trauma that left him in a coma. He was found by Mama Nettie, a voodoo priestess who saw great potential in him to serve as a supernatural protector. She fused the ancient Mask of Shadows into his chest, forcing him to become the Shadowman. It's a lot more complex than that, but that's the gist of it. These deep character building elements really add a lot to the game in many interesting ways. For instance, at the beginning, you're given a worn teddy bear that once belonged to your dead brother Luke. Because of Mike's deep spiritual connection with his kid brother, he's able to tap into the Deadside via this memento, allowing him to fast travel to previously visited locations. Having a toy bear serve as such a pivotal mechanic and making it a core part of the story is just genius. It shows the level of talent the game designers had, and how much they wanted people to care about the character and his story. Whenever you fast travel, you're not just warping to another level. You're touching a memory, a sad reminder of why you're here, of what you lost. If there's one thing Shadowman nails better than almost any other game on the platform, it's exploration. Not in a sense of completing quests or following waypoints, but in that deep, almost spiritual kind of exploration. The kind where every hallway feels like it's leading you deeper into some forgotten memory. And sometimes, your own curiosity is the real danger. You might think to yourself, I wonder what's in this room. It won't hurt to take a peek. Oh, but it will. It'll hurt a lot. The threats in Shadowman don't just loom in the darkness ahead, but also in the past. There is a lot of backtracking in this game, and it's very much a Metroidvania in that sense, which is interesting considering when it was made. The term itself didn't really exist in the late 90s. There were a few Metroid games out by that point, and Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, released just 2 years earlier, but the design principle certainly wasn't as tried and true as it is today. Interestingly enough, Shadowman is more of a Metroidvania than Castlevania 64 is, which was released just a few months prior. It's funny how life works sometimes. Anyways, where were we? Ah yes, backtracking. The level design loops in on itself constantly. You'll be pushing through a blood-soaked asylum, only to find some tiny shortcut that spits you back into a familiar corridor you saw like 20 minutes ago. It gets me all giddy inside, like solving a puzzle I didn't even know I was working on. It actually reminds me a lot of Dark Souls 1 in that way. Granted, the interconnectedness of that game was on a whole nother level, but that's the feeling this game gives me. And to be fair, Deadside is every bit as grim and bleak as Lordran, but Shadowman gives us a witty skeleton snake with an Irish accent and a top hat. Let's see if From try to beat that. Throughout the game, you'll gain access to different items and abilities that will allow you to unlock new areas. At a certain point in each area, you'll be jump scared by a ghostly flashback of your kid brother, a haunting reminder of how we're tethered here to the realm of the dead. This isn't just for cinematic flair, however. These flashbacks act as an indicator that you can now use Luke's teddy bear to fast travel back to this point. And you better get used to looking at it, because you're going to be using this toy a lot. The main point of Shadowman is to collect the Dark Souls before Legion can get his demonic hands on them. You'll find these souls spread throughout every area of the game. There's 120 in all. They're easy enough to find if you're being thorough in your exploration, and you can always tell when one's nearby because you'll hear a giant, disturbing heartbeat. These fleshy containers are called Govi. No matter how many of these things I came across, they always made me slightly uncomfortable. I don't know if it's just the heartbeat sound or the way they pulsate, but it just feels unnatural. The cool part is, whenever you crack one of these things open, you're treated to a short, badass cutscene.
Are mine.
Not every soul is contained in this way, but most are. Besides souls, there's another collectible you'll be finding on your journey called a cadeau. These ceremonial pots look eerily similar to hearts themselves, and after you've collected 100 of them, you can bring them to the Temple of Life to increase your health pool.
These gifts I give to thee, O gracious Loa, O generous Loa, a spiritual trade for life beyond.
So you're probably wondering, why does a dark game like this have so many collectibles? Well, the 90s was the peak era for 3D platformers and collectathon games. Nearly every major N64 title did it. Mario, Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong. Hell, even Ocarina of Time had the gold Skulltula tokens. It was a fun way to encourage players to explore these wonderful 3D spaces, and offered a few more hours of gameplay for those dedicated enough to find them. Speaking of Ocarina of Time, both games flirt with that hub and spoke structure of level design. Where Ocarina builds around the bright, open Hyrule field, Shadowman is more like a labyrinth that's eating itself, forcing you to retrace your steps through a place you'd rather forget. Progression in this game revolves around your shadow level, a measure of how many Dark Souls you've collected. Once your shadow level is high enough, you'll be able to open another soul gate, thereby unlocking a new area. Every soul gate has the required shadow level indicated around the door, and they can be opened by activating these coffin-shaped platforms. Doing so always results in another awesome cutscene.
I am the Lord of Deadside. Deadside.
This dude is just so damn cool. I love it. Exploration becomes a ritual of patience and memory. Find the souls, raise your level, revisit old haunts, and see what's changed. It's a slow, deliberate loop, but deeply rewarding at the same time. If Shadowman feels at all familiar, it's because one of its creative leads, Guy Miller, cut his teeth at core design, the same team that made Tomb Raider, and you could feel that DNA immediately. There's ledge grabbing, ledge shimmying, and even rolling. But while Tomb Raider gave you clean, self-contained playgrounds, Shadowman traps you in one enormous fever dream. It's like someone took Lara Croft and dropped her into the middle of the Upside Down from Stranger Things. And honestly, now that I say it, I'd play the hell out of that Tomb Raider game. The platforming here is surprisingly tight.
Tight, yeah!
Especially by late 90s standards. And it's leagues better compared to a contemporary like Castlevania 64. There were many, many times in that game where platforming deaths felt like bullshit. But in Shadowman, errant deaths always feel like my fault. Sometimes I might leap at the wrong angle, or push down instead of up. I did that one quite a bit. But it never feels cheap, and instead it has the opposite effect. It makes me want to get better. Once you've learned enough about an area to breeze through it without losing any health, it feels awesome. It's not just progress, it's personal growth. Shadowman 64 makes you a better person. I'm being facetious, of course, but the point still stands. Movement in this game is wonderful. Well, except for combat. And that's going to be one of my better segues today. Combat in this game is very much like the world of Shadowman, meaning there's two different sides, some of it good and some of it not. Let's start with what works. There's an interesting array of weapons in this game, each with their own unique abilities. At the beginning, Mike just has a handgun. This mundane weapon is usable whenever you're wandering live side. However, when you go to Deadside, that ordinary pistol transforms into the Shadow Gun, its voodoo counterpart. Even for a default weapon, it's capable of delivering some decent damage, and you'll be using it a lot throughout the game. It's got unlimited ammo, and you can also charge it for a stronger shot. I didn't realize that for several hours into the game, so hopefully you'll get more use out of it than I did. Other items function more as tools than actual weapons. The flambeau, for instance, is used to burn down cloth doors marked with this special symbol. You could use it in combat, but you're better off reserving your precious energy for doors, since they often hide goodies inside. Every Deadside weapon outside of the Shadow Gun consumes an energy called voodoo power. This acts as a sort of general ammo system, which can be recharged by these orange skulls found around the map. This adds a small amount of survival horror to the game, since if you're anything like me, you're going to be saving that precious voodoo power for when you really are in a bind, or fighting a boss. Another cool feature is dual wielding. At any time, you can switch what weapons you're holding and which hand they're in. This doesn't make too much of a difference in combat, but it does matter outside of it. You'll be grabbing your fair share of ledges in this game, but whenever you're holding something, that's taken into account. If there's an item in your left hand, you'll grab the ledge with your right, and vice versa. But if you're dumb like me, you might jump off a cliff with both hands full, only to then watch as poor Mike falls helplessly to his death. It's a neat bit of realism that helps add to the immersion. Another small tip, enemies will start to convulse as they're nearing death. However, this doesn't mean that they're dead. Once you see a monster do this, you need to shoot them again. If you don't finish them off during this small window, they will regenerate health and continue attacking. This might not sound like too big of an issue, but it can literally be the difference between life and death. Not only are some enemies just tough to deal with, but they usually drop this red essence which recovers some of your health. These awkward convulsions are a clever mechanic that help build tension, especially when you're fighting a group of enemies. More often than not, I found myself hiding on a ledge like a coward and picking enemies off since their pathfinding wouldn't allow them up to me. It might sound cheesy, but sometimes it was downright necessary. The only time shooting feels good in this game is if the enemy is directly in front of you and the lock-on stays focused long enough for you to down them. And that brings me to the bad side of combat. Enemy projectiles reach a lot farther than your own, so getting into a shootout is oftentimes frustrating, especially in more constraining areas like this lava pit. The harpies here have a clear advantage from distance, and even when you're daring enough to close in, they either fly farther away or directly above you. This is another challenge unto itself. The game has a lock-on system similar to that of Ocarina of Time, but it's not nearly as reliable. And it also doesn't track enemies vertically. So if you want to look up and shoot, you need to enter first-person mode, but doing so locks your character in place, leaving you vulnerable to all incoming attacks. Weapons like the Asan help a bit with flying enemies, but not by much. And during your journey, you'll battle against a variety of enemies, ranging from human prisoners to sniper pigmen. What is this, Minecraft? But out of all of the monsters you'll come across, none will be as deadly or as frustrating as these little bastards right here. See, you can swim in Shadowman, which is really cool. Most games at the time would kill you just for looking at water the wrong way. But this game not only lets you swim, it lets you dive and explore underwater passages. This is awesome, I thought to myself. Oh, what a fool I was. The Bloodwater is home to these tiny stingrays called deadfish. At first, you might mistake them for being cute. They're not cute, they're little monsters, making them the perfect target for me to constantly miss. When in the water, it's best for you to take your time and shoot all of them before proceeding forward. You can choose not to do this, and you might even elude them for a time, but trust me, they will find you. Thankfully, Shadowman can hold his breath seemingly forever, so I guess that's somewhat of a fair trade-off for the amount of time you'll be struggling with these little demons. The amount of panic one feels when you see one of these little fuckers barreling down on you is unrivaled to anything else in this game. Oftentimes, you need to weigh the risk of quickly swimming ashore and battling the monsters there, or taking your chances in the water, hoping the rays don't tickle your feet. The land is almost always the better option. But even on land, enemies can get on top of you in a hurry. Sometimes you'll try to create space and whip around for another attack, but good luck, because they run just as fast. These sprinting zombies with claws are always breathing down your neck. Fuck those things. It kinda reminds me of rubber banding in Mario Kart 64. Doesn't matter how far ahead you are, Toad is right there the moment you hit a banana. Now, to give the game credit, the enemy design is fantastic. Monsters are grotesque and horrifying. They move and sound like they're in pain and filled with hatred. Take the Deadsiders, for instance. Just listen to how these things sound. If you were a kid playing this game in '99, you'd be shitting your pants. I'm in my 30s and barely holding it together now. There were few games that matched this level of horror back then, and certainly none on the N64. These monsters feel like they belong in Silent Hill, and I love it. I thought these creatures would have been inspired by the comics, but that's not the case. In fact, almost everything in the game was created for the game. That's quite impressive when you consider that most of these monsters are made from scratch. Acclaimed Deadside's art team really knew how to adapt the comic's dark tone and atmosphere to the game. The only characters they brought over from the comic were Mike, Mama Nettie, and Jondi. Speaking of which, let's talk more about those cutscenes and voice acting. The game uses in-engine models for the scenes, which was common practice for the time. One notable feature, however, is the characters' mouths moving when they speak. This was a rare sight back then. When you compare it to something like Metal Gear Solid, for instance, another game with amazing cutscenes, you can see the stark difference. The character faces there are rather muddy and lifeless. Sure, their bodies are animated, but the emotion doesn't carry over the same as it does in Shadowman. I know this game came out about a year or so later, but still, the technical feat is impressive all the same. You'll be talking a lot to these side characters throughout the game, and each time you'll be sucked into the scene by their performance. The voice actors treated this project with the seriousness that was unusual for the time. You gotta remember, this was still an era when video games were seen as a substandard medium compared to TV shows and movies, and actors often treated it as such. So it's always refreshing to see such great work being performed when many were just cashing in. I already talked about Red Pepper, but there were other talented voice actors too. Lady Manila, who voices Nettie, has an exhaustive amount of work under her, far too many titles for me to list out here. And Barry Mead, who voices Jonty, hasn't had much work, and that's a damn shame, because he crushes his performance. Just take a listen to it for yourselves.
Hello there, Michael. How's that treating you?
Jonty, kindly refer to me as Shadowman. Michael Lawa has no place here in Deadside.
Whatever, Mick. It's good to see you again. Seems like simply ages since I last set my eyes on your happy, smiling mug.
Your feelings mutual.
I suppose you've been away dallying with the old battle axe, giving her one with some of that righteous voodoo so she can stay forever young?
Something like that.
She's been filling your head with her fated pillow talk again, I'll bet. Doomsday in an army giddy until you're drunk with the stuff.
She did happen to mention a certain prophetic dream she's been having.
Did she now? Well, for once I think the owl witch might be right. See that bloody big black tower yonder?
How could I miss it?
Well, old Bruegel, the medieval painter blokey, was just telling me the other day that he thought it looked remarkably like a picture he once did.
Is that Peter Bruegel?
No, Seamus, his distant Irish cousin. Anyway, he was quite shocked though he was at the terrible mess that bloody thing's making. Appearing out of nowhere and tearing its way through the place like there's no tomorrow. Which, given what Nettie's saying, might not be too far from the truth.
Any idea what's going on in there?
Nope, and I shan't be knocking on the front door to find out neither. All I'll say is, if there's something wicked heading this way, it'll be coming from in there.
Nettie mentioned the Dark Souls. Can you tell me any more about them?
I'm afraid I'll have to reply in the negative again, Michael. Suffice it to say, Nettie's told me that they're bloody powerful, well nigh indestructible, and shouldn't fall into the wrong hands.
Any idea where they might be?
What am I, a Dark Souls travel guide now? I suppose you could try all of the ancient sacred places down amongst the whalers and shiverers. I just hope that none of them souls have ended up in that filthy big black tower.
From what Nettie was saying, some of them already have, which is all the more reason for me to be pushing on. Open the gates, Jaunty.
Places to go, people to see, eh, Michael?
Just open the gates, Jaunty.
Did I ever tell you about the time me and Attila the Hun were playing skittles with the guillotine heads of the French aristocracy?
Jaunty.
All right, keep your bloody hair on. Which, looking at your shining bonds, may prove to be rather difficult. Open sesame! And if you wanting to pop by and chat a while, I'll still be here. It's just a shame we can't share a drop of the hard stuff together by a roaring peat fire.
I don't drink with snakes.
Of course, this review wouldn't be complete without me mentioning the music and sound design. They were handled by Tim Hayward. Tim masterfully blends electronic and industrial soundscapes with percussive beats, creating an eerie and immersive tone throughout the game. He was also brought back to reprise his role for the Shadowman remaster in 2021, which is a great choice. He has a few other titles under his belt, but the one that stood out most to me was Jackie Chan Adventures on PS2. I love that show, and I just felt like it was worth mentioning. So, is this game worth playing today? Absolutely. Some of you may prefer the remaster since it greatly improved the visual aspects among other things, but for me, I prefer the older, less defined features of the original. The muddier textures create an almost uncanny valley feeling in some areas, where Deadside feels more like a vivid nightmare than an actual location, and I think that fits this game perfectly. Sure, combat's going to be, well, what it is, but there's an innate horror aspect in that itself. Being limited in what you can do is a genre-defying staple, after all. Are you going to be terrorized by vicious little stingrays? Yeah, most certainly, but you're going to be a better person for it. Deadside wants to break your will, to make you kneel before evil itself, but you'll find the resolve to overcome that fear. If anything, this game is worth playing just to say you've experienced it. I'm glad I got the chance to replay this game after all these years, and I'm excited to see what other horrors await us on the N64. When it comes to the horror genre, there are certain games that require no introduction, and the Resident Evil franchise is certainly one of them. Odds are, if you're watching this video, then you're very familiar with the series, or at least one of the mainline games. Quick aside, I am planning on doing a full retrospective on this game in the future, so I won't be diving too deep into it here. But obviously, I had to talk about it. When you read the title of this video, this is probably the first thing that came to mind. It certainly was for me. The Nintendo port of Resident Evil 2 needed to change a lot in order to cram onto the 64. But how much of the game would be lost in translation? Would it even be worth playing? Well, let me go ahead and spoil this whole section right up front. Not only is it worth playing, it's one of the greatest feats in game development history. Following the incredible success of Resident Evil 1, Capcom attempted to iterate on their new IP with an even bigger sequel, and they absolutely nailed it. The game was a smash hit, crushing the original sales and fame. So, naturally, they wanted to push the sequel far across the gaming landscape. Handhelds were out of the question though, since Resident Evil on the Game Boy ended up looking like this. So the next logical step was the PlayStation's Nintendo counterpart. And yes, I know the Saturn existed, but no one was playing it by '98. Besides, Nextech tried porting it there and even that fell apart. But porting the game over to the 64 would prove a significant challenge all the same. However, unlike the Saturn, the juice would be worth the squeeze. The N64 shared a large market presence alongside the PlayStation. But unlike the PlayStation, the 64 was bereft of mature content. And I don't mean that type of mature, though the system certainly lacked that too. But I'm referring to games that would be enjoyed by someone older than 15. On PlayStation, you had seemingly endless titles to choose from, many with darker themes or edgy content that lured in that teenage audience. And though Nintendo had next to none, there was certainly a demand for it. So when Capcom announced they'd be porting RE2 over to Mario's platform, gamers rejoiced. And really, this was a win-win for both parties. Capcom could start spreading its undead tendrils into an untapped player base, and Nintendo could look a bit cooler to its older fans. But the biggest hurdle still remained. How would the developers get to show off the game's awesomeness within such tight confines? The primary challenge was compressing over 1.2 gigs of data from the PlayStation's 2 discs onto a single 64 megabyte cartridge. Since Capcom wasn't well versed in the 64's hardware, they'd be contracting with another developer to do just that. But who would be crazy enough to take on such a daunting task?
Hi, this is Ken Griffey Jr. Let's play Major League Baseball. It's showtime. Call me.
Based in San Diego, California, Angel Studios, a small, relatively unknown team, had just finished releasing Major League Baseball featuring Ken Griffey Jr. The game was decent enough, praised for its fun, arcade gameplay. Surely, they seemed like the perfect studio to handle a Resident Evil port, right? Well, as it turns out, that's exactly what they were. You see, Angel Studios went on to make some pretty good games, but it wasn't until 2002 when they were acquired by Take-Two Interactive that they really hit their stride. Today, you might know them better as Rockstar San Diego. That's right, the same studio who brought you the Red Dead series was responsible for porting RE2 to the 64. Man, I love video game history. Of course, at the time, Angel Studios wasn't the same prestigious studio that we know them as today, but they were pretty damn talented all the same. This port was nothing short of technical wizardry. To start, Angel Studios developed custom compression tools for every aspect of the game. The original's 15 minutes of FMVs took up over 700 megabytes on the PlayStation. That alone was more than 10 times the size of an entire 64 cartridge. In order to squeeze it all in, the team heavily compressed the game's assets using a proprietary video codec, not Nintendo's standard HQVM, along with several other techniques. For example, the frame rate for videos was halved from 30 FPS down to 15. There's a lot more that went into video compression, but what's important to know is that it resulted in muddier visuals compared to the PlayStation, at least where the FMVs are concerned. And thankfully, since RE2 used pre-rendered backgrounds, there wasn't much compromise needed there. The game's audio took a big hit too. Voice clips and sound effects were heavily compressed. Audio was loaded in dynamically as needed to prevent RAM overload. I could bog you down with lists of technical details on how they did it, but I think you get the gist. If you're someone who likes nerding out about this type of stuff, then I highly recommend checking out Modern Vintage Gamer's video on the port. He breaks it down better than I ever could. Angel Studios didn't stop at just porting the game, however. They actually added exclusive new features as well. Talk about overachieving. Among the many changes, the biggest one was probably the item randomizer mode. This mode randomly shuffles the locations of non-key items like health, ammo, and ink ribbons. This forces players to adapt on every playthrough, substantially increasing the game's replayability. They also added violence and blood color settings. I can't help but think that these options were forced on there by Nintendo. I mean, they were the ones who replaced Mortal Kombat's blood with gray sweat, after all. Still, I actually think these are good additions. If you had a younger sibling who wanted to play and you didn't want them having nightmares, for example, this could be a good way to avoid that. Plus, I kind of like the green blood. It makes me think the zombies are really parasitic aliens instead of just flesh-eating creatures. I don't know, it's just fun and kooky. There were some surface level additions as well. For one, both Leon and Claire got new alternate costumes exclusive to the platform. And for those of us who like Resident Evil's lore, they added 16 new exclusive in-game documents known as the X-Files. No, not that kind of X-Files. Mulder and Scully won't be joining us on this adventure. I can only imagine how they'd hold up in a town full of zombies. No, the X-Files I'm referring to provide additional story context that bridge narrative gaps between Resident Evil 2 and a couple other entries in the series. Besides that, much of the core gameplay largely remains the same. At first, I thought the controls would be a complete mess when comparing the PlayStation controller to the N64's Trident, but I've gotta say, I adapted rather quickly. A and Z are interchangeable, both handle the same actions like selecting items or firing your weapon. The right trigger readies your weapon, B runs or cancels, and so on. The team also took advantage of the additional buttons offered by the C-pad, including an auto-targeting system, which worked pretty well. However, I did prefer using the directional pad over the control stick for the tank controls. But what can I say? I'm old school. Visually speaking, this game is like viewing a painting through a light fog, or a stained glass window might be a better metaphor. The colors are just a bit off, but the emotion is still somehow intact. The FMVs tell a different story. They're murkier, almost impressionistic now. But in a strange way, that grain fits. It makes that opening scene feel grimier, less cinematic, and more of a found footage kind of vibe. Like you're watching a cursed tape passed around from one player to the next. Thankfully, the game's iconic score remained mostly intact. Lead composer Masami Ueda's work cannot be understated. I'd argue that Resident Evil's music is the most memorable aspect of the entire franchise. Aside from the monsters, of course. I could play any track from this game, and many of you would get hit with some nostalgic memory or feeling that you had when playing this game for the first time. It's that powerful. The PlayStation version had the luxury of CD quality audio. This meant that every echo in a hallway and every trembling violin note had some space to breathe. The N64, by contrast, had none of that. The console didn't even have a dedicated audio chip. What it did have was the MusicX audio engine, Angel Studio's cleverness, and a whole lot of compression. The soundtrack was reworked from the ground up to emulate the original, but the soundscape feels tighter, more metallic even. Reviewers at the time called it tinny and muffled. But in a way, that imperfection gave it texture. The limitations almost enhanced the sense of isolation. It's a very odd feeling. Despite all that, the Nintendo version actually pulled off something the PlayStation version never did. Dolby surround support. Angel Studios was pulling out every trick in the book. If you had the correct setup at the time, it could almost feel like there was zombies shuffling behind you. Beyond that, there really isn't much difference between the original and this version. And what differences there are negligible to all but the most hardcore of fans. And let's be honest, they probably aren't playing this version anyway. This version of Resident Evil 2 isn't just a port, it's a development masterclass. It's what happens when a small team looks at an impossible task and decides to try it anyway. And that decision, that refusal to accept limitation, is what defines late 90s game development at its very core. And there's something poetic about that. This game about survival, about pushing forward when everything seems impossibly doomed, survived its own great challenge in being made. Maybe that's what makes this version so special. It's not just a technical feat, it's a story of persistence and hope. And in a way, it mirrors the characters themselves. The horror remains, but the spirit endures. In the mid to late 90s, every major franchise made the leap from 2D to 3D. Some became masterpieces, while others did not. And then there were those stuck in a polygonal purgatory, a space between the light and the dark. For me, that is Castlevania 64. And yes, I know, it's actually called Castlevania, but for clarity's sake, I'll be referring to it as Castlevania 64 throughout most of the video. When Konami announced the game as their first major leap into the 3D realm, it generated a lot of hype. Expectations were understandably high. It was supposed to be a grand, horrifying adventure into the third dimension. But instead, what we received was a mixed bag, a Frankenstein of conflicting parts that pleased almost no one. But does Castlevania 64 really deserve its bad reputation? Or is there a greater monster lingering beneath it all? Back in 1997, Konami Computer Entertainment Kobe, or KSEC, a subsidiary of Konami, began the daunting task of transitioning Castlevania from 2D to 3D. The franchise was a titan of 2D side-scrolling, and as such, bringing it into the future of three-dimensional gaming was a bold yet necessary risk. See, for gamers at that time, 2D games were out of vogue. Who wants to play Mega Man X when you could play Mega Man 64? Don't answer that. It may seem ludicrous now, but believe me, this was a very real thing. It was one of those things you just had to be there to experience. Of course, making this jump in gaming technology wasn't so easy. Many studios were struggling with it at the time. For every Mario 64, there were about 20 Bubsy 3Ds. Still, the team at KSEC had a vision, and with the backing from Big Brother Konami, they got to work. Things didn't start off so well. The group had to create a new 3D engine for the Nintendo 64 from scratch. A task that proved quite challenging and led to many technical flaws, including the infamous camera. As months flew by, deadlines loomed, and the genre's scope needed to be drastically cut down. The original game had an ambitious 4-character roster. Previews and playable demos painted a promising picture, teasing not just the familiar Belmont air, but a cast of distinct characters and a grand, dark adventure in Dracula's polygon-rendered castle. But the team had to slash it all in half. In fact, there was so much cut content that they saved it for the re-release, Legacy of Darkness, that would come out later in the year. But don't worry, we'll be getting into that shortly. By February of '98, the game was only 20% complete, and with less than a year before the release date, the pressure was mounting, and it was mounting fast. This led to a rushed and unpolished final product, but it had to be done. And yet, despite all these challenges, Castlevania 64 was released to the world in January of 1999. The game opens with a gorgeous cinematic that seamlessly transitions to the menu select screen. I tried several times to describe this in writing, but I simply couldn't do it justice. So instead, I'll let you watch it, uninterrupted, so you can experience this beauty for yourself. But first, I want you to really try and imagine what it was like to be a kid in 1999. It's Friday night. You and maybe a few of your friends are eating some pizza rolls and putting this cartridge into the 64 for the first time. Most of what you've experienced in gaming so far has been two-dimensional. One of your friends turns off the light, another turns on the console, and then, all of a sudden, you're greeted with this. That is pure art. If it doesn't get you all giddy inside, I don't know what will. This opening was Konami's way of dropping trow and slamming their meat onto the 3D table. a definitive statement that the major leaguers had finally arrived. And if that opening isn't really your thing, maybe the menu music will be. There's just a head-nodding type of vibe to it. I don't know how to explain it. Everything about this screen just oozes with style. A magnifying glass hovers over your choices. Options you select are signed with blood. And then, once you're ready to begin, you're given this pretty intense little moment where you get to see the leather-bound Necronomicon. Yeah, let's fucking do this. When you start the game, you're given a choice between two protagonists, each with their own campaign and motivations. The first is Reinhard Schneider, a whip-wielding heir to the ancient Belmont clan of vampire hunters. Don't let his name fool you. His family is an offshoot branch of the Belmonts, an association that created both deep pride and profound insecurity within him. There's actually a bunch of interesting lore online about it. It's worth the read if you have the time. The second is Carrie Fernandez, a young orphan with powerful magic in her bloodline. She tragically lost her parents to Dracula's minions and is now on a quest for revenge. She has a particular beef with the witch, Actress, a loyal servant of Dracula who harbors a special hatred for the Fernandez family. These character backstories are fun and interesting, plus they play a role in what each character experiences throughout the game. Now, for the uninitiated, Castlevania 64 is an action-adventure game, which blends in some of the series' classic horror elements. Exploration involves navigating dangerous environments, fighting various enemies, and collecting items to progress. Character movement is a key feature, but also the most difficult monster to take down. Many platforming sections emphasize timing and precision, which are two things this game sucks at. Or maybe it's just me. It's probably just me. It also doesn't help that the camera system is a shoddy mess. Platforming in this game feels like pulling your own teeth out with pliers. That is to say, it sucks ass. You get used to it eventually, but I can also get used to getting punched in the face every day. That doesn't make it good. The biggest problem I have are the platforms themselves. They're inconsistent. Sometimes they're easy to grab, while other times you need to jump at just the right angle and grab onto just the right spot. Otherwise you fall to a horrible death. And I know, the developers were still trying to get a handle on this whole 3D platforming thing, but when you compare this game to contemporaries like Shadowman 64 that came out only 7 months later, the difference is staggering. Now, I wouldn't be complaining so much about these parts if there weren't so damn many of them. For a game centered around killing monsters, it feels like half the time you're just battling ledges. It's maddening. I'm starting to feel like Bubba from Forrest Gump. There's stationary platforms, visible platforms, some that rotate from under you, others that move through the environment like rail shooter, some that crumble underfoot, some that crush you, some that stab you, and there's even some that only work at specific times of the day. That's right, there's a day-night system in this game. This was a surprising mechanic that I didn't think too much of at first. Not only does it change the way the skybox looks, but it triggers specific events, enemy strength, and even affects the game's ending. My first real aha moment came when I was in the villa. There was a large fountain in the center with some goodies on top. Try as I might, I couldn't reach the damn things. I found this unique texture in the water, but still, nothing. I figured you must unlock it later by double jumping or something like that. Later on, when I had returned and I was jotting down some notes, I heard a rocky, gravelly sound. And wouldn't you know, that texture in the water was actually a stone pillar. It rises up at midnight for only a short time, so it's easy to miss. And this was honestly a lot of fun for me to discover. But that's when I was struck with a sudden sense of paranoia. What other timed events have I been missing? Were there other cool secrets that I just had to wait around to find? Thankfully, no, not really. Like much of the game, this mechanic was trimmed down significantly due to time restraints. There are certain doors that can only be opened at specific times of day, but luckily you find these day and night cards throughout your journey. You can use these to manipulate time itself, granting you the power of a virtual Time Lord. Sun turns it to 6 AM and Moon turns it to 6 PM, or sunrise and sunset, respectively. That said, I will offer you a helping hand for this one part. There are 2 characters who you'll meet inside the villa, at least for Reinhardt. I'm not sure if Carrie's story follows the same path here, as I didn't make it this far with her. The first time I entered the mansion at night, and I met Charles Vincent, the mightiest of all vampire hunters. See? His words, not mine. He walks into this room, throwing a cross in your face like he's trying to compel a demon from your body. He tells us we need to leave because of how dangerous this place is. But if you exit this room, and then just re-enter, you'll find him sleeping peacefully in this lavish bed. You know how big your balls have to be to sleep in a place like this? I couldn't figure out where to go or what to do, and there was no waking Charles up. But that's when I remembered it was still night out. So I left and did some more exploring until it was day. But this time, I was greeted by a new face. This enchanting beauty is named Rosa. And yes, she's watering these flowers with blood. Don't question it. Turns out, in order to progress the story, you need to find her in the morning. After a bit of dialogue, she suggests talking to Charles again, who now gives you a key that you need to continue your quest. This was another cool moment for me, and great use of the day and night mechanic. And you get similar experiences to this from the very beginning. You see, the game starts you in a place called the Forest of Silence. It's dark and rainy. A faint fog hangs in the air, masking the limited draw distance. Your perilous journey has only begun. As you explore the woods, you'll come across some cool scripted events like lightning striking down trees and skeletons emerging from the ground. It's all very cinematic and moody. But if you hang around long enough, like I did, messing around with the controls, the rain will eventually subside and the fog will lift. It's now daytime. The skeletons, who seem so menacing at night, are a lot less scary when the sun is shining. Maybe shining isn't the right word, but you get the idea. Despite what I've mentioned so far, this first area is rather bland and uninspired. There are some cool parts, but the game's visuals don't really hit their stride until you reach the castle villa. Here, the game shifts to a slower, more deliberate pace, kind of like you're exploring a haunted house. There are some beautiful areas to be found throughout Castlevania 64. As I mentioned already, the villa was great. Every room felt unique and lived in. The storage room where you can save your game feels sheltered and warm. This antechamber feels cold and empty. The designers really understood gothic horror and fully leaned into that strength. This red curtain blowing in a dark room while there's a storm raging outside, it's such a vibe that it's difficult to explain, but it just feels like Castlevania. These dim, silent hallways are filled with dread, but they also bring about a sense of wonder. I asked myself a few times, what was life like here, back when things were normal? Beyond that, there's confusing hedge mazes, creepy spider-filled caverns, towering clock towers. To me, the biggest standout was the castle center. You never know what awaits you behind each door. It could be a museum room, or maybe it's an arena with a giant sleeping bull. It also has these kooky skeletons zooming around on Harleys like a biker gang. That's a lot of fun. You could tell that the developers were letting their imaginations run wild in here, and that fun transcends into your own experience. But as much as I enjoy the visual spectacle, this area is also home to the most frustrating part of the entire game, the dreaded magical nitro. Just saying those words makes me shudder. Those of you who have played this game before are likely nodding in agreement, or laughing at me. That's fine too. See, there are puzzles in Castlevania 64. Most of them are rather tame, like this observatory, for instance. Simple, straightforward, find the clues and solve the puzzle. No big deal. But then there are these stupid cracked walls. You need to break through these walls, but you can't. You need explosives, but we don't have explosives. So you have to make your own. But the only way to do this is by gathering reagents found throughout the castle. Now, the game does a good job in explaining what you need, and both ingredients are easy enough to find. There's even cool in-game logic behind it. The magical nitro is a substance infused with explosive magical energy, but is extremely sensitive to physical shocks. The mandragora is a mythical plant known for letting out a deafening magical scream when its roots are disturbed. Put the two together, and you've got yourself one hell of a good time. The devs even make it easy for you for the first wall. It's conveniently near the magical nitro room. You place down your ingredients, get some cover, and easy enough, right? But then there's this fucking cracked wall in the bowl arena. It's essentially on the complete opposite end of the castle. So you need to carry the magical nitro down several floors filled with enemies and perilous obstacles. If you get hit, you die. If you jump, you die. If you fall like an idiot because you're not paying enough attention, you die. In Skyrim terms, it's the equivalent of walking from Solitude down to Riften, but you're not allowed to take any roads, and you have a bomb strapped to your chest. This isn't just hard, it's cruel and unusual punishment. Unless you really know what you're doing, you're going to die a lot, and there's no save points along the way. It's a marathon of patience and willpower that cuts the wheat from the chaff. But if by some chance you manage to make it all the way to the cracked wall, you're not rewarded with a cool new item, but instead with an epic battle against a badass bowl. Transitioning the series' combat into a 3D environment was never going to be easy. Combat in Symphony of the Night was smooth and damn near perfect. Those would be mighty big shoes to fill. Castlevania 64 didn't have to be that. It just needed to be on par with its platform contemporaries. And for the most part, I'd say they accomplished that. Each character has both a primary and secondary attack. Reinhardt uses a whip and a sword, while Carrie uses magic and a melee ring. Each also has access to tertiary thrown weapons like daggers and holy water, which use red jewels as a quasi-ammo system. Surprisingly, the game features a basic lock-on system, which wasn't very common at the time. Unfortunately, it's not the most reliable thing in the world, and I can never seem to get it to work right, especially when facing more than one enemy. This means you'll be baiting and dodging a lot of attacks. Sometimes that works, other times not. Now, for the first few hours of the game, combat was damn near unplayable for me. The game would run at the speed of a PowerPoint against certain foes, and I almost had to call it quits on this review. Well, turns out, that was all on me. I was running an old version of OBS, which was destroying my MacBook's performance. After a few tweaks and an update, the game ran smoothly, even in its busier moments. And let me tell you, this game can get busy. You'll be fighting a variety of monsters throughout the game. Everything from werewolves to exotic spiders to these stupid Medusa heads. But your most common foe, especially in the beginning, will be skeletons. What is this, a FromSoft game? Some are giant, some explode, some ride bikes, and some toss bones. They're all pretty easy to take down once you get used to the game's combat, and I love picking these bony guys apart, piece by piece, and it makes for some good entertainment at times. Hey, get back here. Konami really try to emphasize their boss battles, so much so that they have a unique camera called boss mode whenever you encounter one. I didn't notice any difference from the battle mode except you can't ever take your focus off of the boss, which can get annoying at times, but I guess it helps these fights feel more cinematic. When you're fighting the giant bull, for example, its skin falls off halfway through the fight. It's actually a pretty neat effect. It does have this cheap little combo where it can hit you with a beam, but, well, we won't get into that. I couldn't help but feel like something was missing. These fights feel half-cooked in most areas. I can't quite figure out why. Then again, to be fair, most of the game actually feels this way. Now I've been picking at this game's weaknesses, and rightfully so, but amidst all that, there is one undeniable strength. This soundtrack is awesome. By 1999, the N64 had a lot of great music. You had the electric espionage tunes of GoldenEye, the acoustic melodies of Ocarina of Time, and who could forget about the funky beats on Donkey Kong 64? That opening song is seared into my brain. The console's musical competition was stiff, to say the least. Yet, I'd argue that Castlevania 64 holds a spot firmly up there with those industry titans. It's that good. It may not be as good as its 2D predecessor, Symphony of the Night, but few games are. Symphony of the Night was like a dark priest screaming a sermon at the unwashed masses, whereas Castlevania 64 is more akin to cultists chanting in an amphitheater. The music often takes a back seat, creating a genuinely macabre and lonely atmosphere. This is best exemplified by the game's intro sequence, where the melancholic violin solo sets a haunting and sorrowful tone. My favorite song of the entire OST is Annex, Silent Madness. It's one of those tunes that are just perfect for writing or studying, and I should know, I had the extended version playing while I was writing this script. You first hear it when exploring the villa, and that setting complements it well. There's an uncanny comfort to it. I'd put it in a similar vein to that of Resident Evil's safe room themes. It's like dancing with an attractive ghost. You're starting to get all hot and bothered, but you're terrified at the same time. It's downright enchanting. And it's not just the music. The sound design holds up remarkably well too. From the satisfying crack of Reinhardt's whip to the sound of Dracula bamfing himself out of a scene, the effects are crisp and effective. Speaking of Dracula, the game also features sparse moments of voice acting, which was quite a feat for any N64 game.
Miserable world, upstart weakling. All who oppose the Dark Lord must die.
Despite its many flaws, I think Castlevania 64 is better than what its bad reputation would lead you to believe. It's an admirable attempt to carry over the casket from the comfortable world of 2D. And though not everything transferred over smoothly, the gothic horror setting and oppressive atmosphere surely did. Will you be holding your breath during every platforming section? Yes, absolutely. But in the end, it remains a testament to how atmosphere and a pervasive sense of dread can overcome technical shortcomings, and especially terrible cameras. While its reputation soured over the years, it might surprise you to learn that the initial reception for Castlevania 64 was somewhat positive. Reviewers appreciated its ambition and willingness to adapt to 3D, while others praised its gothic atmosphere. It wasn't all moonlight and bloody rainbows, though. There were plenty of people calling out its technical flaws, too. But even harsh critics still found it to be a worthwhile experience. Because of this, many fans were caught completely by surprise when Konami announced a follow-up Castlevania title later that same year. The company had been listening to their fans and taking some notes. The camera is shit? Got it. Bad controls and mechanics? We're on it. The game lacks content? Huh, hold my beer. This might seem like a foreign concept nowadays, but back then, game developers used to make games that their fans wanted. But even for the time, you'd never seen a company release an apology game. Well, sort of. You still had to pay for it. Still, it was like Konami had said, "My bad guys, let's try that again." And I, for one, can respect that. Developed again by KSEC, Legacy of Darkness was born from a mix of regret and unfinished business, an effort to finally deliver the game they had meant to make in the first place. On the business front, this would give Konami a chance to wring a bit more profit out of that Castlevania sponge. Reusing assets and code is always an efficient way to get a little more return on investment. Sure, fans would be paying twice for what was essentially the same game, but at least now they'd be getting their money's worth. It was a win-win for everybody, right? Not even a year after the first N64 title, we got Castlevania, Legacy of Darkness. In some ways it was a prequel, in others a re-release, but whatever it was it confused a lot of people. So what changed? Well, a lot actually. From a technical standpoint, Legacy of Darkness is the better of the two games. For one, the camera is much more controllable. You can now adjust the distance and angle using the C buttons, similar to that of Mario 64. The lock-on system is also refined, making fights a lot more manageable. You have a greater sense of command over the field of battle. I never knew how much I underappreciated Mario's camera system until playing these games. It makes one hell of a difference. Controls are a little tighter, movements a bit snappier, and the frame rate, well, it's there. This is still a Nintendo 64 game trying to render gothic architecture at a stable frame rate, and it certainly tries. They also added expansion pack support, which gives a nice little boost to the visuals, but at the cost of turning your frame rate into a slideshow. You can either see the castle clearly or move through it at a reasonable speed. Pick one. It's the kind of decision that perfectly encapsulates the Nintendo 64. Developers were pushing this system to its absolute limits, but there was only so much polish you can put on these little cartridges. In fairness, they really did fix a lot. The level redesigns are actually good. The forest area got rebuilt into something more open and interesting. They also added some new music as well, providing a wider variety of ambient and atmospheric tunes that enrich the game's excellent atmosphere. But all these changes pale in comparison to the biggest one I have yet to reveal, the werewolf. That's right, you get to play as a fucking werewolf. And if you don't think that's cool, then I don't think you're cool. And I only talk to cool people. Legacy of Darkness centers around Cornell, a man-beast who's on a quest to save his adopted sister Ada. She's been kidnapped and is set to be sacrificed in a ritual to resurrect Dracula, and only her brother can save her. He was supposed to be in the first game, but that was probably the biggest cut Konami had to make. The story takes place years before the events of Castlevania 64. Instead of starting off in the Forest of Silence, the game begins in a destroyed village, a powerful contrast to the first game. Along the way, he has to protect humans, deal with his troublesome beastman power, and face off against old rivals. Unlike Reinhardt and Carrie, who rely on traditional weapons and magic, Cornell's playstyle is more like that of a martial artist, providing a completely different gameplay experience. In his human form, he uses energy-bladed punches, which is great for both ranged and melee attacks. But then, he can also do this. I mean, come on, the dude's a werewolf. Werewolves are badass. Of course you're going to use this most of the time. You could transform mid-combat, which in 1999 was actually pretty mind-blowing. The only real drawback, if you'd even call it that, is that he can't revert back to his human form until his red jewels are depleted, and that's a costly resource. Outside of combat, his presence just adds a new level of cool to the game. It's hard to quantify. Sure, Reinhardt looked edgy, and Carrie had a formidable orator, but I mean, just look at Cornell. He's got that cool silver anime hair that all the really badass characters had back in the 90s and early 2000s. I never had this game as a kid, but if I did, you'd bet your ass he would have been my favorite. Also, his intro sequence on the sinking ship is genuinely awesome. It's dramatic, cinematic, and I'm sure a bunch of other addicts that I can't even think of. And it's about 10 times more interesting than anything that happened in the first hour of the original game. You could feel Kasek flexing here, sort of like they're saying, see, we just needed more time. While on the subject of characters, our old friends Reinhardt and Carrie make a return. Their stories are largely the same as in the original, but now they exist as unlockable scenarios after completing the main campaign with Cornell. You'll be journeying through altered versions of familiar areas. It's a refreshing change of pace for those who played the original. Unfortunately, with all the added content, Konami ran up against that pesky cartridge storage limit. This meant that a lot of the voice lines and cutscenes from the original were now cut themselves. If only they decided to make this game on a console that can handle all of these features. As a result, this makes their playthroughs less immersive. And that's a damn shame, because they actually had some good stories on their own. I suppose if you never played the original, you wouldn't really know what you're missing out on, but you'd still feel like something's off. And that's the paradox of Legacy of Darkness. It's both better and worse. It is the definitive version of the N64 Castlevania games, the one you should probably play if you want the full experience, but it's also the one that feels the most conflicted about what it's even trying to be. It's a remake of a game that ran out of time, made by a team that still didn't have enough time. Or maybe just not enough cartridge space. Don't get me wrong, I do like it. Sure, it's clunky and awkward at times, but it's also earnest. You could feel the developers trying to make things right, trying to deliver on a game that they promised, even if that meant rushing again. It's sort of like a good friend who breaks something in your house. You tell them, it's fine. Seriously, don't worry about it. I'll buy another. But they insist on fixing it anyway. And somehow, in their effort to fix it, they only manage to break it more. And at that point, you're just standing there like, okay, well, now it's really broken. But I appreciate the effort, and I admire that. I really do, because they didn't have to try again. Konami could have just walked away and said, yeah, we did 3D Castlevania once, didn't work, moving on. But no, they went back and actually tried to fix it. That's rare. That's human. But some things are just too broken to fix. And maybe that's okay, because there's a kind of charm in seeing what could have been. Like an unfinished cathedral with scaffolding still hanging on the sides. If you squint hard enough, you could still see the ambition through the cracks. In an age of endless remakes and remasters, this is one game that really deserves a second chance. Give it a modern engine, a stable frame rate, some proper lighting, maybe a camera that doesn't actively try to murder you, and I swear, there's something special buried here. You just have to dig through a lot of nonsense to find it. Maybe one day we'll finally get to see the full game KSEC meant for us to experience. But until then, we're left with two half-built caskets of the same design. Relics of ambition, trapped on hardware that couldn't keep up, howling at the moon for a time they never had. When I was putting together this list of horror games, none of them got me more excited than Nightmare Creatures. I remembered seeing it in videos about retro horror games, and some even called it the PlayStation version of Bloodborne. Now that's some high praise, but it's easy to see why they would make that connection. Despite being separated by nearly 2 decades, the games share a number of similarities, such as the 19th century Victorian Gothic setting. There are more of these as well, but we'll cover them as we get through the video. The point is, my expectations were higher for this game than others, solely since I like Bloodborne. I know, it's unfair, but that's also the truth. So, did the game meet those lofty expectations? Well, let's talk about it.
Behind every wall, around every turn, and inside every thought, you will discover Nightmare Creatures.
Originally released for the PlayStation in 1997, Nightmare Creatures received generally favorable reviews among critics. Some praised its spooky, gothic atmosphere, while others appreciated the FMV cutscenes and gorgeously dark soundtrack. Seriously, give it a listen, it's pretty damn good. There were even those who found the combo-heavy hack-and-slash combat to be an enjoyable way to explore this creepy world. Not every review was positive though. The controls, though serviceable, were clunky, even for the time. There were also complaints about repetitive level design, which led to the game feeling stale just after a few hours. But outside of a few relatively minor complaints, the game was considered a commercial success. Because of this, Callisto Entertainment wanted to port the game over to Nintendo's more family-friendly N64. The console lacked any true horror games. This meant their title would stand out amongst the endless library of kids' games. This new venture also presented them with an opportunity to fix some of their previous mistakes, but there would be a few trade-offs. Most notably, the 64 version replaced all FMV cutscenes with scrolling text. Now, these scenes were one of the better parts of the PlayStation version. Removing these risked killing much of the game's immersion. They didn't have a choice. Cartridge space was low, as was so often the case when porting games to this console. They also dumbed down the soundtrack by a significant margin, further diminishing the game's moody atmosphere. Still, sacrifices needed to be made if they wanted to tap into that lucrative N64 player base. And they certainly did. And so, over a year after the original game was released, Nightmare Creatures hit the 64 in November of 1998.
He works alone, his hands defiling the bodies of the dead in his thirst for knowledge and power. His name is Adam Crowley, a man who was once respected in the field of science, until fate led him along another path, towards black magic. Now he is in possession of the mythical Lost Diary of Samuel Pepys, a volume that contains the detestable rituals of the demon-worshipping Brotherhood of Hecate. Soon, he will complete his work. Tonight, as the sun sets on London one last time, he will unleash his demonic brood onto the streets. And should no one stop him, this city will be consumed by a horde of nightmare creatures.
So what type of game is Nightmare Creatures anyway? Well, it's marketed as a third-person horror game with a strong emphasis on fast-paced, aggressive combat. But at its core, it's an action game. There are definitely some horror elements to it, such as limited draw distance and scary monsters, but that's really where the horror part ends. You could argue that usable items like the gun are a limited resource, but not really in the same sense of a survival horror title. Sure, dynamite is really nice to have, but you can get by just fine without it. Anyway, the story follows two characters, a priest named Ignatius Blackward, and a biologist, Nadia Franciscus, both of which have their own strengths and fighting styles. They unite to hunt down Crowley and stop his plans for world domination. In fact, during the game, you'll occasionally spot Crowley as he's trying to elude you, and his presence adds a fun little bit of tension to the narrative. We've got to stop this guy. Nadia is agile with quicker attacks and movement, while Ignatius is more powerful, but at the cost of slower movement. Movement is characterized by the tank controls typical of early 3D games, especially horror ones. If there were things trying to kill you, chances were your game had tank controls. For a modern player, this might take a bit of getting used to, but honestly, it feels natural once you get the hang of it. For my old ass, it's like riding a directional pad-shaped bike. You never really forget once you learned. I know, that's a stupid joke. I apologize. Now, I like tank controls just as much as the next guy, but they feel really out of place with this game. See, these characters are quicker and more agile than Leon and Claire were in Resident Evil 2, for example. They control more like they're inside of a 3D fighter rather than a retro horror game. When you couple this twitchy movement style with the game's sometimes finicky camera, it makes maneuvering through the environment a significant challenge. You feel this most when you play as Nadia, who heavily relies on quick, bursty combos and evasion. You never feel like the camera is in the right spot. On the topic of combos, each character has several of them, and they're viewable in the controls menu. The developers will occasionally nudge you to try a new combo at certain points of the game. Now, I thought this was their way of suggesting that some are more effective against certain enemy types, but I never noticed much of a difference. For example, when playing as Nadia, I learned a new combo for the side flip kick, BB left C button. Alright, easy enough, I thought. So I tried it out, but it didn't work. Huh, that's weird. Well, it turns out you need to input these combos quickly, and I don't mean QuickTime event levels of speed, I mean Street Fighter 2 levels of speed. I tried this combo a few times, thinking it would increase my damage output, but no. Or if it did, I certainly didn't notice. It sure looks badass when you flip kick a monster in the face, but the damage was negligible compared to just mashing the A button. That leads me to another point of frustration with combat. Every encounter feels like you're being ripped out of a horror game and thrown into some Tekken arcade fighter. It sorta kills my immersion when the lumbering zombie is evading and counterattacking like Hayachi. Each battle feels like its own chess match, and that's really what it is. You'll want to block often as a reliable strategy, and thankfully you can block almost any incoming attack, aside for some breath weapons and boss moves. The best strategy I found is to bait out an attack, then counterattack and pummel your enemy into mush. But this isn't always reliable either. See, enemies can apply the same strategy against you, and unfortunately, a lot of their attacks can knock us down. This is where combat goes from annoying to flat out frustrating. You can try to quickly jump back or block, strafe, but it doesn't always work. And fighting more than one enemy at a time is a practice in willpower and patience that I am incapable of. Also, do you see what I mean about the game's genre? Does any of this combat sound like a horror experience to you? Now, in fairness, there are times when combat actually feels good in this game. Dusting up a Pepe's monster or cutting a zombie in half is satisfyingly gory. Plus, you can stun lock enemies and return the favor if you're quick enough. The best example of this is against the Dockers. These big Hulk wannabes usually smash into the scene through some nearby buildings or boxes, and they can be quite intimidating at first. But you'll quickly learn that all you have to do is keep punching the shit out of them, and eventually they'll fall down. Oh, but what's that you say? They don't fall. Yeah, for some weird reason, the Docker doesn't die like the other enemies in the game. Normally, the devs do a good job letting you know when you've defeated a creature. Zombies will fall apart, Pepe's monsters will howl in pain, you know, that kind of stuff. But for some reason, they just allow you to juggle Dockers endlessly, long after they're dead. The first time I encountered one, I ragdolled the shit out of it for like a minute straight. I kept thinking to myself, well, if I stop, surely this brute is going to destroy me. I mean, just look at how much damage it's taking. Well, it turns out I was just really punching a corpse. That thing had died 10 times over. Outside of your standard weapons, you're given some pretty fun usables to help even the odds. There's an array of goodies ranging from a single shot pistol to repulsive smoke. These are situationally useful for the most part, but something like the guns are used quite often. They can safely destroy explosive barrels to unlock new paths, or sometimes not unlock new paths, but they're also good in a pinch against an unruly creature. This also makes for a pretty good laugh. If your opponent is getting the better of you, you can just say, fuck it, and shoot them, Indiana Jones style. Now I'll give credit where credit's due. The creature designs are actually really cool. Each creature looks unique, and it's always fun when you cut something's limb off, but unfortunately, that's where their uniqueness ends. Each creature feels the same. Sure, the Docker can hit you from farther away than the zombie, but your strategy doesn't change because of that, and neither does theirs. Which is a shame, because I can't help but imagine a world where the devs abandoned this whole hack and slash combat style for something slower and more deliberate, like say, Silent Hill. And here, we've arrived at my biggest complaint about this game. The ultimate frustration that killed any fun I was having. The dreaded adrenaline meter. This annoying thing has to be one of the dumbest game mechanic decisions ever made. Truly, I can't believe a group of people sat around, play tested this game, and all agreed that this thing should be in it. So here's how it works. Once you get past the first level, a bar will appear on the left side of your screen. This is your adrenaline meter. Your meter starts off as full, however, if enough time passes by and you haven't killed something, it will begin to drain. The problem is, once the bar is empty, you'll start losing health, and you will lose health fast. Fighting an enemy will stop it from draining, but the only way to actually refill this bar is to kill something. But wait, I want to actually explore this atmospheric gothic setting at my own pace. Oh yeah? Well, too bad. You're not allowed to go sightseeing in a world like this. You need to kill. This system shares a tiny bit of similarity to Bloodborne's regain system, which rewards players for quickly striking back after taking damage, and doing so allows them to recover some lost health. But the adrenaline system is more like a back alley, drug-addicted second cousin to that mechanic. And I know there's an in-game explanation for this meter being here, but it doesn't make it any better. It's a stupid choice for a horror game. This one mechanic completely kills the experience of the entire thing. God forbid you go the wrong way and get turned around. It's going to be awfully hard finding your way back when you have a ticking bomb counting down on your screen. Now, to the devs' credit, they did implement a much needed toggle for this feature in the game options, which completely fixes this. But I didn't even notice that until several hours in, and by then I was just damn near fed up with this game. Sadly though, PlayStation users didn't get this option. It's just exclusive for the N64, so they still have to speedrun their way from enemy to enemy. I would strongly encourage anyone playing this game to turn the adrenaline off. And in my opinion, it's the way this game was meant to be played. Alright, frustrated rant over. Once you've turned off the adrenaline and returned to the game, you can now take your time and start enjoying the surprisingly immersive environment. Sure, the combat will still break you out of that, but once you've cleaned up the riffraff, there's a lot of nice work here to appreciate. Again, I can't help but to think that a slower game like this would have made for a much greater experience. If you changed a few things around and made this more of a survival horror type of game, I think we would have been talking about 3 survival horror legends from this era instead of just 2. I could see it now. Which world is scarier? Resident Evil, Silent Hill, or Nightmare Creatures? Much like Silent Hill at the time, Nightmare Creatures dealt with technical limitations that forced them to trim down the draw distance and add fog to obscure the game's weaker textures. When paired with the unique setting, it makes for one hell of a mood. Narrow cobblestone alleyways, claustrophobic Victorian architecture, it perfectly captures the grimy, fog-choked streets of 19th century London. But you know, this timeline has monsters, and it's in this way that it's quite like Resident Evil. Instead of tyrants, we have dockers, and instead of shambling zombies, we get undead MMA fighters. And I feel for the design team, because there's so much cool detail here that mostly got looked past by players trying to rush through these areas. I mean, think about how much time and work went into putting together some of these environments just for them to be a blurry background. They even have a cozy Dark Souls campfire here. Taking your time in this game really helps make you feel the weight of the situation. It's sort of, dare I say, immersive? When I'm walking around environments like these, I do get a bit of that Bloodborne feeling. In the end, this game was a big disappointment for me. As I said at the beginning, I came in with high hopes, and I know I shouldn't have. It's my fault. This is what happens when you expect great things. What hurts is knowing that this game wasn't far off from being something I'd really love to play. If they only leaned more into horror instead of action, then I might be making a video about one of the best horror games ever made. But instead, we get this dark, 3D beat-em-up with missed potential. So is this the Bloodborne of PlayStation 1? No, not even close. But it sure does look similar. And really, that's all I gotta say about Nightmare Creatures. Maybe you'll enjoy it, but it's definitely not for me. And for tonight, my time with these horror games comes to an end. I didn't have high expectations coming in, well, except for Nightmare Creatures, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't surprised. Sure, not all of these games are great, but each brings something unique to the table. And more pointedly, they each possess their own style of horror. Yeah, there's plenty of scary games on the PlayStation 1, and hell, there's even some on the Sega Saturn, but they won't deliver an experience quite like this. These horror games are like the mutated monster child your Nintendo parents were trying to keep locked down in the basement. The house is well decorated and spotless, but you can feel a sinister calling to explore the forbidden depths. And just like a monstrous sibling, some of these games are clunky, deformed versions of their previous self. But there's something deeply human about that clunkiness, that awkward reach for something bigger than the tools can handle. Developers trying to summon fear and wonder from a handful of polygons on a tiny cartridge. And somehow, they did. That's the thing about horror, it doesn't really need fidelity. It just needs the suggestion of something that you can't quite see. And the 64, with its terrible draw distance and strange limitations, accidentally became perfect for that. Everything felt a little too quiet, a little too empty, like the console itself was holding its breath. Even now, playing these games again, there's an uncanny sense of absence, like walking through your old house, but everyone and everything has gone. You can hear laughter echoing in the walls. You can still feel the memories. And maybe that's what this era really captured, that soft, digital haunting of childhood, when you didn't fully understand what you were seeing, but you sure did feel it. That same mix of curiosity and dread you get from staring too long at the moon in Majora's Mask, or at that skybox in Wet Dry World. It still creeps me out. A cheerful little box hiding a darker secret behind the pixels that raised you. And when you look close enough, when you strip away the bright colors and 3D charm, you start to see what the developers were really going for. Despite numerous hardware limitations and terrible frame rates, they were really trying to show us something real. Something about fear, about decay, about the parts of us we try to hide behind the color and joy. The flicker of a TV in a dark room, the sound of rain pelting your window, the little moments that made you believe that the monsters could be real. And that's what I love about this time of year. Sometimes you want a fun scare with friends, Other times, you want to feel alone and terrified. Different ghosts for different folks. So if you still have your N64 tucked away somewhere, why not pull it out, dust it off, slide a cartridge in. You might find that these games are still waiting for you, right where you left them. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. I know it's a bit different from what I usually do, but I hope you liked it. I actually had about another hour of video that I had to cut out due to time constraints, so my apologies to any id Software or Shadowgate fans out there. I promise, one day we'll circle back to those games. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a patron or a YouTube member. There's various perks like post-video Q&As, custom characters, and shoutouts. Speaking of which, I'd like to shout out Rambler Uno. You, sir, are amazing, and I'm greatly humbled by your support. Truly, it means a lot. I actually had a lot of fun making this video, and I'm thinking about doing this kind of content a little more often. So if that's something you'd like to see, definitely let me know. But with all that being said, guys, happy Halloween, be safe, and I'll see you on the next one.